part of the Des Moines community. It's just a matter of how big of shows we can do. It's a matter of how big our audiences can be. That's going to be a work in progress as things evolve. But the Playhouse will continue to be the Playhouse. And I want to be very clear about that. We are as 100% committed to that as possible. The types of shows, that may change. Katie, do you have any thoughts on what you'd like to describe some of the shows and some of the thinking that's gone into just our programming?
Sure. I mean, our programming in terms of kind of what's next artistically at the Playhouse, we've been really lucky to experiment this summer a little and start a drive-in theater series. David called me up, I don't know what time of day it was, but said, "What do you think about this idea?" And I was like, "Well, that's great, let's do it." So we are doing three plays this summer for teens to adults ages that will start running next weekend. June 12th is when we open Love Letters. And then we're also doing The Roommate in August. And before that, we're doing Rounding Third in July. Each play has a cast of 2 people, so it's a lot more feasible to stage within a distance and to have only a few people in any space. And ideally, we are going to be able to do all of our rehearsals outdoors on the stage, unless it is 110 degrees or thunderstorming.
Right.
So we've got live drive-in theater going. We're also working on a children's theater show that we can get going for Saturday mornings. And hopefully we will have a lot of information for you about that in the next week or so. And then our education department has been able to do some really creative reorganizing, because usually our building is just full of young people taking classes, and I really miss seeing all of them. But we're moving a lot of things online. She's been working really hard with all of our teachers who've worked with us for many years to work on online classes and some creative ways to bring theater into people's homes, since you can't come to our theater right now.
Okay, excellent. And of course, that gets us through the summer. And then it's like, what's next? Where do we go from here? What are we talking about? Of course, one of the things that popped up was even just the discussion, could we do drive-in theater in September? Is the weather nice enough in Iowa we take that chance? And, you know, it's something to consider. But we actually put together a plan, and we called it, because I was working on leaving Iowa and dealing with, I need a mile marker is a very famous statement in that play. I put together what I called my little mile markers of on the road to our future. And I just want to point out what they are so that we can all watch them together. Of course, the first one is the government allows us to open our facility. And currently, technically, we're not allowed to have anything inside the theater, which is why we picked drive-in theater. The next thing that we're going to be kind of observing and watching is what are the churches doing? Because churches like theater, that's a very passionate, committed group of individuals, and how much are they willing to attend services inside? Then, of course, we're looking at the schools. What are the schools going to do, and how are they doing it? We're looking at other theaters. I had a nice conversation yesterday with a group of theaters or community theaters around the country, and hearing this great divergence of who's going to open when and how they're going to open and what they're going to do. And then, of course, we also are looking at, is there going to be a second wave, as it's been talked about a lot? And is there going to be a vaccine? And so those are the 6 things, the 6 mile markers we're looking at, and they do not happen one after the other. There's just, if we keep checking them off, that's going to shape when and how we can open in terms of having theater inside. So then, Katie, what would become some of the theater that we would do once we've determined, for practical purposes, we're going to keep our audience safe and our performers safe? What are we going to do in terms of plays?
Right, so plays is the answer for a while, I think. I know we love to do big musicals here, and we're lucky to have the facilities and the staff to do it, but those are on hold for a little bit. So if you were expecting us to open, for instance, Chicago in September, we're going to go ahead and push that back until we feel like it's safe to be singing and spitting on each other again. So I'm reading and looking through a lot of play options, and obviously options that have a cast that is small. You know, ideally, if we had 2 to 4 brilliant plays with 2 people in them, that's sort of the direction that we're headed and that we're looking at, still trying to find a lot of variety and a lot of different stories to tell. And timing wise, it's when we meet the criteria that David and the Playhouse are looking at. But it's a great opportunity to maybe do some plays that we wouldn't normally look at. So I find that really exciting. Um, I'm getting to even the roommate this summer, I'm just really excited we can do a play that's a little bit newer and that a lot of our audiences probably haven't seen or maybe even heard of. So in that regard, it's I think kind of a fun challenge to figure out how to program something that only uses a few people on the stage and that might even be open to some interesting staging to keep people a little more separate. Um, we're definitely going through a lot of Zoom rehearsal trials and errors right now and learning, when we want to have a quick banter in a scene, we're going to need to be 10 feet apart, but in the same room to do that. Because as you know, there are some delays and things that can go wrong on Zoom and with the internet. Um, and yeah, so it's obviously not ideal because we all want to be up here singing and dancing as well as part of our season, but it's on the back burner until we feel like we can do it safely and we get to look at some new and different works that we don't normally get to do here. David, I know, and kind of speaking about musicals, a question that has come up a lot and that came up a lot when we were opening Singin' in the Rain, obviously, is that we were supposed to have a 4-week run that started on March 13th. We got through 2 shows and then we closed, and a lot of people are wondering what our thoughts behind that were. So David, do you want to maybe start off and just take them through your response a little bit?
Sure. Partly, of course, is that there was a great conversation that was going on from March 1st on. We were heavily and intensely staring at each other, and we were actually making decisions at 9 o'clock in the morning and then changing and reversing them at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because of new information that came out. It was an absolute whirlwind. What was fascinating is to look back on that and sort of say how innocent and naive we might have been in that thinking process. But we got to do the show. We got to open it. Everybody was a little bit nervous, and we saw audiences had already started um, asking for exchanges for other performances or refunds even at that point. And then as I went to see a play Saturday night, it was my first chance to go see a different play. I was in Indianola, and I'm driving back listening to the governor's press conference when she was at the time shutting down the churches. And I said, if she's shutting down the churches, we likewise need to follow the same suit. And so was the most horrific message I ever had to do was to stand in front of the orchestra and say, gentlemen and ladies, thank you so very much for your wonderful work, but we're shutting her down for now. We're going to postpone to the best of our abilities, but we're going to close the show tonight and see what happens. And having that same presentation made to the cast at the same time. And it was gut wrenching. In all my years of doing theater, I've never, even when I had to close a theater, I never had to close it like that. There was handwriting on the wall, and so nobody was shocked. This one was really a bit of a disappointment because it was such an incredible production. So we postponed it. That's the official word that we gave, was a postponement until we could figure out what was going on next. But then more information came out, and we started trying to explore other avenues and options. And Katie, where did we take it from there?
Well, I can speak to the actor response too, because I was talking with them a lot as well. The cast and crew of the show have spent so many hours putting that brilliant musical together, and it's just so much work and feels awful to only get to show it to 2 performances worth of people. Um, and so, we really feel for how horrible and hard that was for everyone. Including all of us who clearly wanted to be able to do a 4-week run of that show because it's great. Um, but and that kind of does explain, I think, why we were trying to postpone. And like you said, we were making a new plan every day or week or sometimes hour where we thought, okay, well, could we try to um, film some scenes safely, or is there any way to bring anyone in, or any kind of like filming option for the show? Oh, okay, well, maybe we can open our season with it. Okay, it's not going to be safe to do a musical, then we've got to push it back. And it's just starting to feel like, it has to get pushed back to the point where it's not going to feel like the same production anymore anyway. And it's going to be a remount if we do it again. And so I think that was what led us to finally kind of cancel. But after trying to think through every possible option, and ultimately I just don't think we can bring people in and do it safely and then still do the show it's like justice and um, tell that story very well, even if we were trying to film or something. Um,
Right.
so that's sort of the road we went down. And I know that sort of the next question that follows that up is, with no shows and no classes going on for a long time, it's going to be really hard on the Playhouse finances. And David, what are we doing to financially recover from a pandemic? I mean, like, I don't know that there's a
Right.
big answer to that question, but I know it's what a lot of people are wondering about.
Right. Well, to be frank and fair, as we are a public institution and some of our numbers are very public, we do have a $2.1 million budget. Unfortunately, for our 2021 season, actually, I guess, yeah, 2021, um, we lost half the season because although it was in March, which is like 9 months into the year, the two big musicals, Singing in the Rain and Matilda, are part of it. So we lost a significant amount of income, which was a challenge. Because like many nonprofits, and especially like almost every theater, you really are running very tight. You don't have savings because you're either putting it into the shows or putting it into salaries where necessary. So we got aggressive, and we did actually take a furlough for the staff. All the staff except for myself were furloughed as we figured out what was going on, and tried to come up with a schedule and a plan. And then we got our PPP loan, which we were ever so grateful for. And that's when we were able to bring the staff back. And one of the things that was very important about bringing the staff back, of course, was making sure we had something to do. It's not just nobody, and there's not a soul out there that wants to just sit around at their desk and stare at their screen, and or sit at home and stare at their screen. So we had a couple of neat projects we were able to work on. We had our storage space. We cleaned up some storage down here in the building. We purged where we needed to purge. Those projects that you keep saying I'm going to get to at the end of the show, you never get to. Well, we got to. And we also got to work on our drive-in theater program. And so we had, with the grant, or the loan, not the grant, the loan, we were able to bring the staff back and make some things happen for the summer. Of course, that's going to get us through the summer. And then the question that's on everybody's mind is what's going to happen in the fall. Unfortunately, we don't know. There's some probability or possibility of going back on furlough for a while. I know that there are some theaters around the country that actually are trying to open in July and August. And if they open in July and August and something great happens, we may look at that and say, hey, we think we can pull it off, even with the reduced seating and reduced capacity and keeping everybody safe with the right programming. We haven't made any firm, hard decisions, but we basically recognize that we cannot operate the way we were operating, at least for a while. So, of course, also, unfortunately, that does take us to the fact that without income, without ticket sales, then we are extremely dependent upon the support of our corporate sponsors and partners who have been with us through thick and thin, support of our government, in terms of like the Iowa Arts Council gave us a grant, which we were very supportive of and appreciative, which allowed us to continue some education offerings. And of course, just our private donors. Those are the ones that have been super supportive where possible. Those that could afford it did not ask for refunds or credits. They just made a flat donation of everything they had given us. Others gave us a percentage of their purchase that they could for a donation. And we know that others that are like really strongly supportive of the Playhouse and have made donations. For example, the drive-in theater is a matching donation. We have a collection of funds waiting, and every dollar that's given at the drive-in will be matched from this account of donors who said, hey, let's make this drive-in practical and useful to us as well as fun. And that's one of the things. It takes business. Yes, Katie.
David, I just wanted to answer another question that I know we've gotten a lot, to just talk about the artistic side of things and what happens when there are no shows on stage, and why don't we just film a show? Because I know that came up a lot early on with us too. Um, and I think, anyone who's doing any kind of live stream or filming, it's a great thing to put out and for people to see. But to sort of tie into what you were saying, like, we're talking about can we like generate any revenue from shows that we're doing and still keep people safe? And then also the artistic side of that is, do people want to be in their house and watching a performance on a screen when sort of that like magic and that energy we get when we're doing a live theater performance comes from having 400 people sitting in this room and people on this stage telling a story, and that energy that exists and that kind of feeds off one another, that's not really something that um, we can recreate in a video for someone. And so we're, again, like, drive-in theater is still at least an attempt to give people the feeling that they have when they're sitting in a room and watching something live happen. And I really love what Anna Shapiro, the artistic director at Steppenwolf, said about, you know, a recorded performance, it's never going to be uh, that same feeling that you get in an audience in a theater. But maybe there is something to being able to try to evoke that in people, for you to remember that feeling and get that feeling if you watch something recorded. And so right now we don't have plans to do that, but I do think, as we talk about, like, into the future and a second wave potentially happening, I think we're gonna have to try to find other ways to do theater and tell stories to people that can at least evoke that sense of togetherness if we can't be together.
Well,
And I just wanted to
yeah.
touch on that a little bit.
No, I think that's great, and I think there's room here for a couple of minutes of philosophy, if you don't mind. We'll discuss this together. Um, th- what is happening on Zoom and what is happening in terms of streaming, in terms of live, in terms, the presentations, because those are very, very valid entertainment venues. I don't question those at all. I think, I myself enjoy a good live show watching it. But from the performer's standpoint, you have no idea what the reaction is. That little red light above the camera doesn't tell you whether somebody's laughing or somebody's sad. So what makes theater theater is the common phrase that was being bandied about for a bit was shared air. When we get to share the same air, even working with just two people on Zoom rehearsal, you can tell they're not connecting like they will on the stage. And so, but that being said, as I also know, we brought a little circus act. Angie supported and brought in Iowa Circus Arts for a little 30-minute show in our drive parking spot, which gave us a test of drive-in theater. And it was fun to see the performers interact, even though the cars were like 20 feet away from them. They could see the people inside laughing and cheering it on. So it was a fun solution. So I think theater has been around. Technology allows for some greater opportunities for storytelling and greater opportunities to connect. But we also still, the purist in me says, no, theater is theater because we're sitting in the same room. But that's not possible right now. So let's find ways that we perhaps can sustain and revenue streams and pay for the staff that it takes to make magic happen, even via Zoom.
David, I wanted to bring up another question that we've had. I know we've touched on this a little bit, but several of the viewers who are with us right now have asked about how the Playhouse is going to be changed when it does reopen, in terms of how do we plan to protect volunteers and guests and staff, and who's going to be wearing masks? Are we going to have playbills and concessions like normal? And I think we might want to touch on that a little bit for the summer plan as well, since that's sort of an immediate test of how we're going to deal with it.
Right. Well, that one of the things that I know is that the requirements, and this is why we haven't been very vocal for the future, is because the requirements are so adjustable. I mean, every time we make something and somebody comes out and says, well, you don't need that, you need this. If we all remember, masks were a bad thing in February. So it's just, things change. But I do know what's going to happen for the drive-in, and I would like to share that. For the drive-in, all of our volunteers, all of our parkers, people at concessions stand, and it's not a concession stand, we'll talk about that in a second, but everybody who's involved and connects with our audience will be wearing face shields. Those who prefer can also wear masks. They're wearing gloves. And we have a fun thing. They're going to be wearing safety gloves underneath white gloves so that they can look elegant rather than scary with blue hands. And then we have a big green paint shawl or apron that everybody who's working with the public gets to wear, so they don't have to worry about their own clothes, that they can just take this shawl off at the end of the night and it's going to get washed and secured. And everything's going to be safe. We will not have concessions. We have a little concession cart that's going to go around from each parking spot to each parking spot. So they come to you, you don't have to go to them. We keep our bathrooms tightly controlled and managed. And so when you go into a bathroom, then somebody's going to go in and wipe everything that you would have touched, and then we come back out and let the next person in. We are not going to have an intermission. We're going to do a 7th inning stretch where the audience gets to stand up, turn around in their spots, and wiggle, and the actors get a little drink of water or something like that. And then we're going to continue the production, which is why our productions are all less than 90 minutes, so that we can accommodate that. And we're going to have contactless, no tickets, so we don't have to worry about that. We're going to put a sheet of paper on your windshield so you can look at that, and then we can take it off if you want to throw it away or if you want to reach around and grab it. But of course, it will be touched with gloves by us. So these are the things that we're looking. And of course, our parking spots are all going to be 6 feet apart, and as per the governor's directive. So, you know, those are the ways we're going to protect our audience. The way we protect our actors is the fact there's only 2 of them, and yet the stage is a 16-foot wide stage. So they're very easy for them to get 6 feet apart at all times. We even had to build special benches so that we could make sure when they're sitting on a bench together, they're 6 feet apart. So in that regard, we're working very conscientiously about how to keep everybody safe. Because one of the things I want to mention is that we have such passionate volunteers and such committed theater performers that sometimes it's our job to keep them safe from themselves. Because you can imagine, I myself would do the same thing, jump in, I don't care, let me jump in there and get started, and we'll do what needs to be done. And sometimes we need somebody to watch out for us.
So high fashion, if you're volunteering for us, fashionable and protective wear. Staff's going to be cleaning up the bathrooms for you, so you don't have to worry about those germs. And we also have a lot of kind of interesting ways to deal with the behind the scenes things with actors and safety. Having your own dressing room, which anyone who's performed at the Playhouse might be really excited by, because usually you're sharing it with about 12 other people. Having designated bathroom spaces for cast and crew as opposed to public use, and even sort of down to the details of who's touching what prop, and can we only have this person deal with this, and what do we need to wipe down after every rehearsal. So yeah, rehearsals have changed a bit, but we are trying really hard to keep everybody safe. And I think that those kinds of changes will be implemented for a long while at the Playhouse.
Yeah.
I know that we're running out of time, and I just kind of wanted to recap some of the bigger questions that everyone had for us. We talked about how we're working on the 2021 season. We've been given a little bit of insight about when we might reopen to the public. David, do you want to say anything else to that point, or just clarify the big question of when are we going to open, even if the answer is, I don't know.
We don't know. One of the things, if somebody really had to hold, really put our feet to the fire and said, give me a date, I would tell you today, we would be looking at March. But the reason I say that is only because I don't want to keep kicking the can every 30 days. I'd much rather, how excited would it be if on October 1st we get to say, hey, guess what? We get to do December. So that's why we're leaning towards March. We're going to be doing some season ticket announcements during this drive-in theater sequence, so people get a heads up as to what's going to happen. It's going to be a loose schedule. Meaning we don't know exactly when things are going to start, but we know, and we don't know exactly what the plays are going to be, but we're going to be probably at least 4 out of these 6 choices are some of the things that we're thinking about doing. And then we also will be looking at, you know, making sure our audiences are protected. So having the social distancing required inside the theater and following the rules and the guidelines and practices that have been established by theaters around the country. Because there's at least one theater that's trying to open a show the 1st of July. So, and they're talking it's being a musical. And I'm like, I want to see how this works. I'm excited for them. And if they give us some things that we can do, perfect. That's even better. Because one of the things that's most important is we are not alone. Every single theater in the entire country, and probably most in the world, are dealing with these same issues and challenges. And so that's the relief, because it's not just Katie or just Katie and David or even just the Playhouse solving the problems. We have an entire community of theaters helping us solve the problems.
And
yes.
Well, just to recap, I think the other big kind of artistic side of that question is, are we doing any of that 2021 season that we were really happy to announce. And just to make sure I'm clear about what that is, if there's anything from that season that we can still perform safely, I think it would be one of our plays. And even then, I'm still looking at new options that have fewer people on the stage. I think any and all of those shows will resurface in future seasons. And to be clear about 2019 shows that we didn't get to perform in our, current suspended season, there isn't, we're not making the kind of plan that other theaters and some places are making to just kind of push all of those back. So for instance, Matilda, we will do Matilda at this theater, I'm sure, at some point in the future, but we're not looking to retrieve those immediately. We're thinking more about how to program some stories that are safe for actors and that work well for audiences if we're limited by COVID-19 well into the future.
And Singing in the Rain will come back. We will get to do that show. We saved the important props, we've saved the designs, we've saved the costumes. So we'll bring it back when it's safe for everyone. One last quick note. We know one of the questions that does also pop up is what does the Playhouse need? What can we do to support the Playhouse? As I said before, we are not having an income stream from ticket sales, so every donation is extremely valuable and necessary. You can go online to make a donation. If you're uncomfortable with that, you can call the box office, or if you want to just give me a call or Katie a call and say, hey, what can I do to support? We'll be glad to work with you. We will pass you off to our Director of Philanthropy, Chris Anderson, who's an excellent individual who really takes care of the Playhouse. And it is one of those things that we are going to continue to need some funds until we can figure out ways to have streams of income that come from other directions and other avenues. But
David, I think we have one other question that's
yes.
come up in the course of this conversation. A lot of people right now are asking if they can bring their own concessions to the drive-in in their own cars. And I believe the answer heartily is yes.
Please, yes. The thing that we did with the drive-in theater is a pay what you can plan. You pay that night. Concessions are going to be pay what you can plan, pay that night. We will have some concessions available. If you want to bring your own concessions, by all means, you're welcome to do so. I will say that we'll nudge you that night to say, hey, what you would have spent on concessions, you can throw in our donation bucket if you're inclined. But again, this is part of our service to the whole community. We recognize everybody's conditions and situations have changed. And some people just may not be in a position right now to make a contribution. And we totally accept that. We want to give you theater too. We want to give theater to everybody that we can.
Awesome. So bring whoever and whatever you want in your car and come see the drive-in shows this summer. Thank you so much for letting David and I just take a few minutes probably out of your lunch hours and out of your day to talk to you about big questions we've been getting. I'm glad that we could have a conversation about it and just answer them for everyone all at once. You can always get a hold of any of us on staff here. If you have further questions, you can call and email. And we hope that we can see you this summer at the drive-in and know for sure that we will see you in the future at our theater for a show.
The show will go on, we promise.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.